Well, there's several parts of this story. This is a 1-hour talk, so we don't want to go too far into this. But part of what's involved is that this Buddha, abundant treasures, comes from the very distant past. The text says, it's not just an accident, the text says at least 4 or 5 times that he's extinct. This extinct Buddha is talking to us in the present. And part of what's involved here, what is perhaps most importantly involved here, is the idea that the past, in this case, a dead Buddha, can be alive in some important sense, can be alive in the present. And in a certain sense, this story is the heart of this story is a kind of warm-up for later on in the Lotus Sutra when it will try to persuade us that Shakyamuni Buddha, who died, who was a human being, died and was cremated, his ashes were distributed in stupas, that this Shakyamuni Buddha can also be alive in the present. And it's going to suggest some ways in which, more than suggest, it's going to kind of emphasize some ways in which Shakyamuni Buddha can be alive in the present. So there's a sense in which this story, the heart of this story, is a warm-up for that idea, that the past can be still, or that a Buddha who lived in the past and is now extinct can also be alive in the present. It kind of puts a different cast on what is meant by extinction. It's not quite what we may have thought. We can also, the Mahayana way in which a Buddha, including this Buddha, including Shakyamuni Buddha, the Mahayana way in which a Buddha can be alive in the present, maybe I shouldn't say the way, maybe the most important way in which a Buddha can be an extinct past Buddha can be alive in the present is through what came to be called Buddha nature. That's a term that doesn't occur in the Lotus Sutra itself. It comes up a little bit later in the Nirvana Sutra. But the idea of the Buddha nature, the idea that in every living being, later this will get even expanded beyond living beings, appropriately I think, every living being has within them, that means you, every one of us, has within us, in some way, the Buddha alive. So, it's very important in a lot of these stories, including this one, that this stupa is seen. Now, I think, maybe not everybody would agree with this, but I think what the sutra is trying to tell us is if we had this video camera there at the time that the stupa emerged from the earth, the video camera might not see anything. It takes a Buddha nature to see a Buddha. And what the text is trying to say is that if you can see a Buddha or a stupa emerge from the earth, it's because you have the Buddha already in you, even if you're not a Buddhist. So we can think of abundant treasures as being important not only for suggesting a Buddha being alive in the present, though extinct. The importance here is that this abundant treasures Buddha is a symbol of Buddha nature and people seeing Buddha nature in others. In other words, I think at the heart of the Lotus Sutra is the idea that in order to see the Buddha nature in others, in order to see the Buddha in the Buddha, in order to see the Buddha in Shakyamuni Buddha, there has to be a Buddha in you. And so in the Lotus Sutra, there's all of these things, being a Buddha or being a Bodhisattva, is always a reciprocal relationship. It's always an interactive relationship. In other words, the text is telling us Shakyamuni Buddha himself could not have been a Buddha all by himself in a closet or anything of that kind. So that's the second kind of lotus flower that's in the Lotus Sutra. And here's the third kind. This comes from another story. This previous story of Abundant Treasures Buddha is in chapter 11. And we've got 12 interesting stories there. The story of Devadatta, the guy who tries to kill the Buddha. The story of the dragon princess, very important. And a couple more chapters, and then we get to chapter 15. And these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that have been assembled from all over the universe, now it's getting time to go home. They've seen Abundant Treasures Buddha, they've seen Abundant Treasures sitting on his seat with Shakyamuni Buddha beside him. The show is over, time to go home. But a few of the Bodhisattvas who've come from somewhere else get to feeling a little bit sorry for Shakyamuni Buddha. And they go up to him and basically they say, "You sure got a tough job. You got a really terrible assignment being in this world." And they're comparing it, they're in their minds comparing being the Buddha of this world. Throughout the Lotus Sutra, there's emphasis all over and over and over again that Shakyamuni Buddha is the Buddha of this world. There are Buddhas in other worlds. This is our world. This is Shakyamuni Buddha's world. So Shakyamuni Buddha is the Buddha of this world in a very, very special sense. But for these Bodhisattvas, that's a tough job. And basically what they say is, you know, the people here are kind of slow and difficult to teach. And so we thought we would just stay behind and help you out. We're volunteering. And Shakyamuni Buddha basically says, you realize I'm not quoting these things precisely the way they're written, but close enough, I think. Shakyamuni Buddha basically says to these volunteer bodhisattvas, thanks a lot, but no thanks. We've got plenty of bodhisattvas of our own. And then there emerges from the earth a gazillion bodhisattvas, led by these four. Gazillion is probably not a terribly accurate translation, but it'll have to do because all of the sutra wants to tell us, again in this case, is a huge number. Never infinite, these numbers, but approaching infinite. A finite number that's a lot bigger than you or I would ever want to have to count. There are four leaders here. I think I've got them individually. Just show you some pictures. This is superior practices, unlimited practices, pure practices, and firm practices. These are the four leaders of the gazillion bodhisattvas who emerge from the earth. And, importantly, they are seen by the four groups. The four groups basically means monks and nuns, laymen and laywomen. They're seen by the four groups. And it says, there's a kind of interesting little phrase in there, it says they're seen by the four groups by the power of the Buddha. Now again, this is a text which doesn't have the notion of Buddha nature in it, but there it is. By the power of the Buddha, people can see these bodhisattvas. Again, I think if we had had the camera there, it would not have seen very much. Abundant Treasures Buddha, the Buddha we were just talking about in his stupa, Abundant Treasures Buddha comes from the past. But these bodhisattvas come from the future. In other words, the text is not trying to talk about time travel. It's really trying to say that in the case of abundant treasures, Buddha, that the past can be alive in the present, and is, in very important ways. And we all know that, actually. But also the future, by anticipation, can also be alive and important in the present. These bodhisattvas are also, in my view at least, these bodhisattvas are also a kind of lotus flower. They come up from the earth, from everyday life, and they blossom in the air. They too are flowers, in this case emerging from the ground of everyday life to do the work of the Buddha in this world, which is the work of bodhisattvas. So there's an abundance, at least these are the three main, there's an abundance of kind of flower imagery in the Lotus Sutra. What this means is that whenever the Dhamma Flower Sutra, well actually we wouldn't have to limit it to that, whenever the Dhamma, Buddha Dhamma, is truly taught. Now again, there's a catch to this. Somebody can stand up and, in English we can say they're teaching. But in the Lotus Sutra, nobody's teaching unless somebody's really taught. In other words, again, teaching is a kind of interactive thing. If nobody's learning, then nobody's teaching. So, whenever the Lotus Sutra is really taught, that is when people are moved by that teaching or preaching. Not just talked about, but truly taught. Moving people in some way to embrace Buddha Dhamma. Then stupas emerge from the earth. And bodhisattvas emerge from the earth. That's what the Lotus Sutra is trying to tell us. When this text, when the Dhamma, when Buddha Dhamma is really genuinely taught successfully, stupas emerge from the earth and bodhisattvas emerge from the earth. The purpose of these images of lotus flowers, blossoming, of a stupa emerging from the earth, of bodhisattvas emerging from the earth, the purpose of all of this is to encourage you to a certain way of life, to a way of life in which you cultivate your Buddha nature, your blossoming, your flowering. The Buddha, in other words, the Lotus Sutra wants us to be flowers.